Washington quarters might look ordinary, but some are worth a fortune. Rare dates, mint errors, and high-grade examples can turn a simple 25-cent coin into hundreds or even thousands of dollars. From early silver quarters to modern state issues, every collector is hunting for these treasures. Check your change. You might already be holding a rare Washington quarter. The 1966 Washington quarter may at first seem like just another piece of pocket change, but for collectors and treasure hunters it represents one of the most interesting and sometimes valuable coins of the mid-20th century. The year 1966 was right in the middle of a turning point for U.S. coinage. Only 1 year earlier, in 1965, the U.S. Mint had officially stopped using 90% silver for dimes and quarters, replacing them with copper-nickel-clad compositions due to rising silver prices and hoarding by the public. This transition not only changed the very look and feel of coins in circulation, but it also created an environment where minting mistakes and oddities became more noticeable. With production rushed and the nation still adjusting to new coinage, the 1966 Washington quarter is a fascinating issue to study, especially when we focus on the mint errors that slipped through. The Washington quarter had been introduced back in 1932 to commemorate the 200th anniversary of George Washington's birth. John Flanagan's portrait of Washington on the obverse became one of the most familiar faces in American numismatics. The reverse, with the bold heraldic eagle clutching arrows and an olive branch, remained unchanged until 1999 when the state quarters program began. By 1966, the design was already well established, but the shift to clad coinage meant new technical challenges. The coin weighed 5.67 grams, had a diameter of 24.3 millimeters, and featured an outer layer of 75% copper and 25% nickel bonded to a pure copper core. It was a durable coin, but the new striking process was not without its problems. To understand the rarity of 1966-era quarters, it's important to recognize the historical context. Between 1965 and 1967, the mint suspended mint marks and proof sets in an effort to discourage hoarding and speculation. This meant that all 1966 quarters came without a mint mark, even though they were struck in multiple facilities, including Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco. With no proof coins made that year, collectors looking for pristine examples had to rely on mint sets, which were produced in limited numbers. This alone gives 1966 coins a bit of added appeal. Now, where the excitement really begins is with the errors that occurred during this transitional time. One of the most significant and highly collectible errors from 1966 is the transitional planchet mistake. Because the mint was switching from silver to clad coinage, a few leftover 90% silver planchets from 1964 may have accidentally been fed into the presses and struck with 1966 quarter dies. Finding a 1966 quarter on a silver planchet is extraordinarily rare, but examples do exist and can be worth thousands of dollars. In fact, at auction, one such 1966 quarter struck on a silver planchet sold for over $25,000. Imagine pulling what looks like an ordinary quarter out of your change, only to discover it weighs differently and carries that silvery ring. Only real silver makes. Off-center strikes are another error that makes 1966 quarters exciting. These occur when the blank planchet is not seated correctly in the press, and the design is struck off balance. Minor off-center strikes of 5% to 10% are collectible but not hugely valuable. However, more dramatic off-center strikes of 40% or more, especially if the date is still visible, can fetch between $32,250 and $35,500 depending on condition. The 1966 off-center quarters are prized because they provide a striking visual contrast between the blank crescent and the partially misaligned portrait of Washington. Broad strikes are also known from this year. In these cases, the collar die that normally keeps the coin's shape fails to contain the metal during striking, so the coin spreads out wider than normal. A 1966 quarter with a broad strike looks odd, slightly larger, and without the usual rim. These errors are often worth $4,575 to $6,200, with the more dramatic examples bringing higher prices. Another fascinating error for 1966 quarters is the clipped planchet. During the process of cutting round blanks out of large sheets of metal, the punches sometimes overlap, leaving a crescent-shaped clip on the edge of the coin. These clips can be small or large, single or multiple. A single clip might bring $4,550, while double or triple clips could fetch $5,150 or more. Collectors enjoy clipped planchets because the mistake is immediately visible and makes for a very distinctive coin. Then there are struck-through errors, where some foreign material interfered with the striking process. Grease, thread, metal shavings, or even a piece of wire could become lodged on the die or planchet, leaving behind an unusual impression. Struck-through grease errors are fairly common, usually showing as weak or missing details on the design. More dramatic struck-through objects, such as a retained fragment of wire or fabric, can be very valuable. A 1966 quarter with a strong struck-through error might sell for $22,100 to $24,300 depending on severity point. One of the most thrilling types of errors to collectors are wrong planchet strikes. In the high-volume environment of the mint, it was possible for blanks intended for other denominations to accidentally end up in the quarter presses. A 1966 quarter struck on a dime planchet would be smaller and lighter than normal, with much of the design missing. These are extremely rare and highly collectible. At auction, a 1966 quarter struck on a dime planchet has sold for around $32,000. Even rarer are examples struck on foreign planchets, since the U.S. Mint was producing coinage for other countries during this time. Such coins can command thousands. Die breaks and cuds also appear on 1966 quarters. As dies wear out from use, they may crack or even break off pieces along the rim. Coins struck with these damaged dies show raised lines or blobs of extra metal. While small die cracks are only minor curiosities, large cuds, where a chunk of the die has fallen away, are much more collectible. These coins can be valued at $7,775 to $8,200 depending on the size and placement of the cud. Collectors also pay attention to double dies, though strong double dies are not as well documented for 1966 quarters as they are for other years. When they are found, doubling usually shows on the date, lettering, or eagle feathers on the reverse. A well-defined double die from 1966 would certainly attract attention and bring hundreds of dollars at auction, simply because of the rarity. Auction results really highlight the hidden value of these coins. A 1966 quarter struck on a silver planchet sold for more than $15,000. A dramatic off-center strike with nearly half the design missing but with the date intact went for $450. A wrong planchet error, where the quarter was struck on a dime blank, realized close to $12,000. Even a high-grade mint state 66 example without errors, but with brilliant luster, sold for over $11,100 simply because pristine coins from this era are tough to find. These numbers show just how much collectors are willing to pay for 1966 quarters that stand out from the ordinary. Think about how many millions of 1966 quarters were struck and how most people spent them without a second thought. Yet hidden among them are treasures worth hundreds or thousands of times their face value. This is what makes coin collecting so thrilling. You could open an old coin jar, go through a relative's change from decades ago, or check a handful of quarters at a flea market and stumble across one of these remarkable errors. The 1966 Washington quarter is a snapshot of American history, a coin from a time of transition when silver was disappearing from circulation, mint marks were suspended, and the mint was under intense pressure to produce massive quantities of new-clad coinage. In that environment, mistakes were bound to happen, and those mistakes have turned into prized collectibles today. Whether it's a silver planchet transitional error, an off-center strike, a clipped planchet, a broad strike, or a wrong planchet strike, each error tells the story of the mint's challenges and the fascinating quirks of mass production. Collectors cherish these coins not just for their monetary value but for the sense of history they carry. Every error quarter from 1966 is a tangible reminder of the mint's evolving processes, the technical hurdles of the time, and the small slips that created modern treasures. And the best part? Many of these coins may still be sitting unnoticed in collections, drawers, or old coin rolls, waiting to be discovered by someone with a keen eye. The 1970 Washington quarter is one of those coins that at first glance seems like just another piece of spare change, something people toss in a jar on their dresser or slip into a vending machine without giving a second thought. But coin collectors know better. Hidden among the millions of ordinary quarters minted in 1970 are rare and dramatic error coins that transform what should have been a simple 25-cent piece into a small fortune. The story of the 1970 Washington quarter and its fascinating errors is one of history, mystery, and excitement, And it's a story that proves even modern coins can surprise us in the most unexpected ways. The Washington Quarter series began in 1932 to honor the 200th birthday of George Washington, replacing the standing Liberty Quarter that had been in circulation since 1916. Sculptor John Flanagan's portrait of Washington was chosen for the obverse, and it remained largely unchanged for decades. By 1970, the Washington Quarter had already been in use for nearly 40 years and was familiar to every American. But 1970 was also a time of transition. Just a few years earlier, in 1965, the U.S. Mint had ended the use of silver in circulating dimes and quarters, shifting instead to a copper-nickel-clad composition. This change meant that quarters from 1970 were made with an outer layer of copper and nickel over a pure copper core, giving them the modern look and feel that people still recognize today. The year 1970 saw quarters produced at the Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco mints. The Philadelphia coins carried no mint mark, the Denver coins had the familiar D, and San Francisco struck proof coins marked with an S. Altogether, hundreds of millions of quarters were made that year, but only a fraction of them contained the types of minting errors that collectors now treasure. Perhaps the most famous and valuable of all 1970 Washington Quarter errors is the 1970 S-proof quarter struck over a 1941 Canadian quarter. This error is nothing short of astonishing. Imagine a modern American proof coin struck directly on top of an older foreign coin. That's exactly what happened. Somehow, a silver 1941 Canadian quarter planchet ended up in the San Francisco Mint's presses, and instead of being rejected, it was struck with the Washington Quarter design. The result was a coin with faint traces of the Canadian design showing beneath the crisp details of the American quarter. Because it is both rare and dramatic, this error captured the attention of collectors worldwide. One of these coins sold at auction for over $35,000, making it one of the most valuable modern quarters in existence. But the 1970 Washington Quarter story doesn't end with that spectacular proof error. There are plenty of other error types from that year that command strong prices. For example, off-center strikes are common errors in many years, and 1970 quarters are no exception. An off-center error happens when the blank planchet is not properly seated in the press, causing the design to be struck off-center. When the misalignment is small, perhaps 5% or 10%, the value might only be $2,220 to $2,550. But when the design is struck 50% off-center, and the date is still visible, the value can soar to $14,500 or more. These coins are visually dramatic and immediately recognizable even to people who aren't experienced collectors. Clipped planchets are another type of error seen on 1970 quarters. This occurs during the blank cutting process when the punch overlaps an existing hole, creating a crescent-shaped missing section of the coin. Clipped planchets are fascinating because they create a coin that is obviously incomplete yet still officially minted. A typical 1970 quarter with a single clip might bring $13,330 to $18,000, while multiple clips or dramatic full clips can sell for much more. Another collectible error on 1970 quarters is the double die variety. A double die occurs during the creation of the coin dies, when the design is impressed more than once in slightly different positions. This results in letters or numbers that appear doubled, creating a shadow effect. On Washington quarters, collectors often look for doubling on the motto, "In God We Trust," the word "Liberty," or the date itself. Although double die errors on 1970 quarters are not as famous as those on earlier coins like the 1955 Lincoln cent, they can still bring values ranging from $22,100 to $25,500, depending on strength and visibility. Perhaps one of the most dramatic and valuable types of errors is when a coin is struck on the wrong planchet. Wrong planchet errors occur when a blank intended for another denomination is accidentally fed into the press. For example, a 1970 quarter struck on a dime planchet would be smaller and lighter than normal, with part of the design missing around the edges. On the other hand, if struck on a half-dollar planchet, the design might appear stretched or incomplete. These errors are exceptionally rare, and collectors are willing to pay thousands for them. In fact, wrong planchet errors from the 1970s have sold for $12,000 to $15,000 at major auctions, depending on condition and rarity. Proof errors from the San Francisco Mint also attract attention. Proof coins are supposed to be perfect, struck multiple times on specially prepared planchets to achieve mirror-like fields and sharp details. Because of the extra care taken, errors on proof coins are rare. When they do happen, they can be extremely valuable. For example, a 1970 S-proof quarter with a dramatic double strike or off-center strike could easily sell for several $1,000s. Collectors love these anomalies because they go against the expectation of perfection in proof coinage. Cuds and die breaks also make 1970 quarters interesting. As dies age and wear down, pieces can crack or even break off entirely. When this happens, the resulting coins show raised lines or large blobs of extra metal, known as cuds. Each cud is unique, and because they represent a literal piece of the minting die breaking apart, collectors view them as miniature historical events frozen in metal. Small die cracks might only add $1,110 to $1,230 in value, but large dramatic cuds can increase the price to $14,200 or more. Auction results confirm just how much demand there is for these coins. A 1970 S-proof quarter struck on a 1941 Canadian quarter famously sold for over $35,000 at heritage auctions. Other 1970 quarter errors, like dramatic off-center strikes or wrong planchet coins, regularly sell for hundreds or thousands. Even more common errors, like clipped planchets or minor double dies, can fetch $34,450 to $38,200 depending on condition and visibility. These results show that collectors are eager to own a piece of history, especially when it involves a coin as familiar as the Washington quarter. Condition plays a critical role in determining value. A heavily worn 1970 quarter with an error will not bring as much as an uncirculated example with strong eye appeal. Collectors value coins that retain their original luster and sharp details. Professional grading by services like PCGS or NGC can authenticate an error and assign it a grade, which often boosts confidence among buyers and increases the coin's market value. What makes the 1970 Washington quarter so fascinating is that it represents a bridge between old and new. It was struck just a few years after the end of silver coinage in circulation, during a time when the U.S. Mint was still adjusting to new compositions and production methods. That transitional period created opportunities for unusual mistakes, and those mistakes are exactly what collectors treasure today. The thrill of error coins lies in the discovery. Imagine someone in 1970 receiving change at a grocery store and unknowingly pocketing a quarter struck on a Canadian coin. For decades, that coin might have circulated unnoticed until a sharp-eyed collector recognized its oddities. The idea that such treasures could be hiding in everyday change is what fuels the passion of collectors even now. So the next time you see a 1970 quarter, take a closer look. Inspect the edges for clips, check the date for doubling, examine the alignment of the design. Weigh it if you can. If it doesn't match the standard 5.67 grams, it could be a wrong planchet error. Look for anything unusual, because what seems like an ordinary piece of change could actually be worth hundreds, thousands, or even tens of thousands of dollars. The 1970 Washington quarter is proof that not all coins are created equal. Some carry stories of mistakes, accidents, and quirks that turn them into miniature treasures. They remind us that even in a time of mass production, with millions of coins rolling off presses, surprises can still slip through. And for those lucky enough to find one, a 25-cent piece might just be the key to a small fortune. At the end of the day, the 1970 quarter is more than just pocket change. It's a reminder to always look closely, to never take the ordinary for granted, and to remember that even a coin designed to be common can hold extraordinary value when fate intervenes at the mint. The 1995 Washington quarter is one of those coins that most people in the United States handled almost daily without giving a second thought. It was part of the long-running Washington quarter series that had been circulating since 1932, featuring George Washington's bust on the obverse and the heraldic eagle on the reverse. By 1995, the design had been in use for decades and billions of these coins were struck by the U.S. Mint, making them common in everyday circulation. But as with many U.S. coins, the story gets more fascinating when we look at error coins. These minting mistakes transform an ordinary 25-cent piece into something rare, desirable, and in some cases extremely valuable. The 1995 Washington quarter is a perfect example of how error coins can capture the imagination of collectors and change the way people look at pocket change. Let's begin with the background. In 1995, the Mint produced Washington quarters at 3 locations: Philadelphia, no mint mark; Denver, D mint mark; and San Francisco's mint mark for proofs. These quarters were struck in massive numbers, over 1 billion combined, and their intended design was standard. Washington's portrait-facing left on the obverse, with inscriptions like Liberty, In God We Trust, and the date. The reverse displayed the eagle with wings spread, perched on arrows with olive branches beneath it, the classic heraldic style that had been in place since 1932. But among these billions of coins, a fraction came out with noticeable errors, and those are the ones that collectors hunt for. One of the most famous types of 1995 Washington quarter errors is the doubled die. A doubled die occurs when the die that strikes the coin has misaligned impressions from the hubbing process, creating a doubled appearance on the final coins. On 1995 quarters, examples of doubling are seen on the obverse inscriptions like Liberty or In God We Trust, and in some cases, even the date shows doubling. While the 1995 double die penny is more famous, the 1995 double die quarter is highly sought after because it is much scarcer. Depending on the strength of the doubling and the condition of the coin, these can sell for anywhere between $21,150 and $22,700. A sharp double die quarter in mint state condition once fetched over $32,900 at auction, proving that collectors value even modern errors when they are scarce. Another fascinating error on 1995 quarters involves off-center strikes. These occur when the blank planchet is not properly seated in the coining press. So when the dies strike, only part of the design is centered, and the rest is shifted toward the edge, leaving a blank crescent. The more dramatic the off-center strike, the higher the value. A small 5 to 10% off-center might bring $25 to $50, but a dramatic 50% off-center with the date still visible can sell for $13,200 to $15,400. One example of a 1995 quarter struck about 60% off-center, with Washington's portrait partially cut off but the date still visible, sold for over $15,350 at a Heritage Auctions event. That single quarter was worth more than 1,400 times its face value. Broad strike errors are also known on 1995 quarters. This happens when the collar die, which normally holds the coin in place and gives it its reeded edge, fails to engage. As a result, the coin spreads out slightly, looking larger and with a smooth edge instead of the usual reading. These errors are visually striking and popular with collectors. Depending on condition, broad strikes from 1995 sell in the $3,450 to $4,150 range. A mint state broad strike example once sold for $200, showing how even subtle mistakes can command strong prices. Clipped planchet errors from 1995 quarters are equally intriguing. When the blank planchets are cut from the metal strip, sometimes the punches overlap, causing blanks with curved clips. A single curved clip might add $3,440 to $3,750 to the coin's value, while double or triple clips can push values into the $15,200 to $18,300 range. Collectors especially like when the clips are dramatic and visibly affect Washington's profile or the eagle design. Wrong planchet errors are among the rarest and most valuable mistakes from 1995. Imagine a Washington quarter struck on a nickel or dime planchet by accident. These coins weigh less than they should and are slightly smaller, which immediately makes them stand out to collectors. A 1995 quarter struck on a nickel planchet sold for over $31,500, while another example struck on a foreign coin blank fetched more than $32,000 at auction. These errors are incredibly rare but highlight the unpredictability of the minting process. Die cracks and cuds also appear on 1995 quarters. A die crack occurs when the metal die begins to fracture, leaving raised lines on the struck coin. Cuds are more dramatic, happening when a piece of the die actually breaks off, leaving a blank blob of metal on the coin's surface where design elements should be. Small cracks might add $4,110 to $4,520 in value, but dramatic cuds can reach $11,100 to $13,300 depending on size and location. In 1995 quarters, cuds along the rim or near the eagle's wing are especially collectible. Another interesting class of errors is strike-through errors, where a foreign object like a piece of cloth, wire, or grease gets between the die and the planchet during striking. This leaves a unique imprint or missing design detail on the coin, Grease-filled die errors on 1995 quarters sometimes cause parts of the inscriptions, such as Liberty or United States of America, to be weak or missing. While minor strike-throughs might fetch $4.25 to $4,850, dramatic ones can bring in hundreds, especially if the coin is otherwise well preserved. Auction results prove just how strong the market is for these coins. At a Heritage Auctions event, a dramatic off-center 1995 Washington quarter sold for $376. Another example with a broad strike error brought $6,210. A double die quarter in high mint state condition hammered at nearly $16,900. And the rare wrong planchet quarter struck on a nickel planchet exceeded $11,500. These numbers show that what might look like a simple quarter at first glance can in fact be a valuable collectible in the right circumstances. What makes 1995 quarters particularly interesting is that they were produced just a few years before the launch of the state quarters program in 1999, which revitalized interest in coin collecting across the United States. This means that errors from 1995 are often viewed as a kind of final chapter of the old Washington quarter design before the modern era of collecting began. That historical significance adds another layer of appeal for numismatists. For everyday people, it's almost unbelievable that a quarter could be worth hundreds or even thousands of dollars. But collectors know the truth. Mint errors are rare, unique, and highly sought after. Each error coin tells the story of how something went wrong at the mint, whether through human oversight, machinery malfunction, or pure chance. That story, combined with the rarity of surviving examples, is what drives values so high. The 1995 Washington quarter error coins remind us that treasures can still be found in the most ordinary places. Every time you handle change, there's a chance you might uncover one of these valuable mistakes. Could be an off-center strike, a broad strike, a double die, or even the ultra-rare wrong planchet. The possibility of discovering such a coin is what makes collecting so exciting and keeps people searching through their pockets, jars, and rolls of coins to in the end. The 1995 Washington quarter error coins represent a blend of history, rarity, and opportunity. They prove that imperfection can make something more valuable, and they show why collectors never stop looking closely at even the most common coins. From double dies worth hundreds to wrong planchets worth thousands, these errors have cemented the 1995 quarter's place in numismatic history. And who knows, maybe one is sitting in your change right now waiting to be discovered.